Hello, welcome everybody. Um, my name is Robert van der Hulst. I'm one of the people behind the XSharp project. This session has been announced as an XSharp vendor session, but after seeing this morning's presentation, for example about Thor, Thor is a free download, right, for Foxpro developers. Well, we are also not really selling XSharp. It is a free download, so that makes vendor session probably not the right word. But anyway, I want to like to use this opportunity to tell you a little bit about XSharp and our background. Okay, what is XSharp? XSharp is what we call a new incarnation of an old development language. Just like most of you, I started in the 80s with a developing applications. My first application was done with DBase, and later on I discovered Foxbase. I remember having an MFox Plus running in DOS, and then later my customers asked for a bit better performance, and I wanted to protect my source code, and I moved on to other X-based solutions. But I also still did things in FoxPro. So, like you guys, we share a 40-year history of X-based development. So, what is the position of XSharp in this context? And that's why I'd like to go to a bit of history. Maybe we can switch the camera off now. Good. Okay. Xbase. I'm referring to Xbase as a language and not really to the products. So X-based languages started way back in '78 at the Jet Propulsion Lab, JPL, with a project called Vulkan. It was done by Wayne Radcliffe, and this was basically the first incarnation of the language. They needed a small tool to create simple databases, simple cards where they could register information. This was later bought by Acetate and brought on the market under the name DBase. That's when I entered with DBase. And after that, many different variations of this language appeared. A lot of people saw there was an opportunity in creating desktop applications with DBase kind of languages. And there were a lot of competitors then for DBase. I have a few of the familiar names. I'm not going to read them all, but there were many. And together, these languages share a common principles. They have commands like go top, go bottom, use, close, etc. So these have something in common. And this common programming language and their if else and if constructions and do case, otherwise, etc., we refer to that as X-base. And they also had in common that their storage for data was the DBF file. Some of these variations were faster than DBase or allowed you to sell royalty-free programs. For example, Clipper was a solution so you could compile your source code into a exe and deploy just the exe to your customer so your intellectual copyright was protected. Others were like FoxPro, for example, was faster in the sense that it had a lot of speed improvements in the DBF access and had compact indexes which make it easier to store larger amounts of data on your drive. In those days, it could even be a floppy drive. Anyway, many of these programs were living side by side, and things changed when Microsoft launched Windows in 1990. This is a long time ago. The move to Windows resulted in several product changes because going to Windows meant you have to change your user interface. You had to use GUI like Windows. So you see here several names of companies, and they all had products for Windows. DBase had a product, Quicksilver, and what happened over those years is that some of these products died. Basically, the vendors decided the market was not big enough to justify investments, so these products died. Also, some new products appeared. Mainly in the Clipper branch, there were two new products, one called Harbor and the other was XBase++. I know some people in the audience work with XBase++, that's still alive, but some of the other products that you see on this page are no longer with us. So at the current moment, I would say most or almost all of these X-based products are dead. Microsoft has killed development for Fox Pro. Visual Objects is dead. Um, but yeah, so here we are. We all have invested many years in our products, and well, they still work. Visual Objects works, Fox Pro works, but the vendors themselves will not add new functionality. And at the same time, the world is changing. Um, Most of you will get demands from customers to access or to publish your data in the cloud, or to use your data from other applications written in other development languages. So the X-based languages were a bit left behind. And it's also difficult for most of you to find new developers who understand X-base. When they come from school, most of them have learned Java or JavaScript, they have learned C#, but X-base, or in your case Fox Pro, in my case, because I'm coming from a different corner of the X-base community, Visual Objects, you can't find people who understand that. So you have to train them in-house, and that can be a challenge. So what happened? In 2015, um, four people who worked for the Visual Object Development team decided to join forces together with a couple of customers, and we decided that's time to do a new X-based solution and to help the people developing in those languages move their apps forward into the new .NET environment. I'm one of these four. We thought that moving apps to .NET would give you the chance to open up your app to the rest of the world. .NET has excellent facilities to develop for the cloud, and there's many developers on the world who understand .NET. So, of course, moving a language to .NET is not an easy task, because the first thing you need is a compiler. Well, our decision in 2015 was based on the fact that Microsoft had published the source code for the C# compiler on GitHub. It was open source, and it was not just open source, but it also allows you to use that source in your own applications. So we used the Roslyn source code to create our compiler. And with this compiler, we can create full 100% .NET assemblies that contain your software in a .NET assembly. And yeah, we decided, since Roslyn is open source, it's not more than normal that we would make our product open source too. So XSharp is an open source implementation of the X-based language on .NET. And our compiler is created on top of the Roslyn compiler. So what was our plan? First, to create the compiler, and then to make the compiler flexible so we could compile several dialects of X-base. Because if you go back in time, the original X-base language had no facilities to create your own classes. So each of these different variations of X-base have invented their own syntax to create classes. And these are not all compatible. So what our idea was, we create a compiler that we can switch into a target specific mode. You can give it, say, enable a dialect and say, for example, I'm compiling for Fox Pro, and then define class is accepted by the language. But if you compile in another dialect, define class will not be recognized by the compiler. And by doing that, we can have, because there's a lot of common stuff in all those languages, we wanted to reuse those common stuff, but make the compilers basically configurable, so you can configure it for a specific language target. And what we also wanted to do is, of course, deliver a runtime, so you can open your, well, basically you can run your code, and we have the support for stuff like DBF files, but also for accessing data through, for example, SQL String Connect and SQL Exec. So what we wanted is to have a common runtime, but also, because there are variations in the language, have some dialect-specific runtime syntaxes. So some of the stuff that the people from XSharp Plus need will not be necessary to have in Fox Pro or the other way around. So what have we done since 2015? Well, we have created now a compiler, a runtime. We have integrated our language in Visual Studio, and We support the latest 3 versions, the last 3 versions. We have dropped support for 2015. Um, so we also have, of course, documentation. We have online forums, and to help sponsor the development, we have a support contract. So people who think this is an interesting way forward can subscribe to our subscription and help, yeah, basically sponsor the development. So the Visual Studio integration is consists of several components. I'm going to show you in live in action in a minute. But of course, we have a project system. Why is it moving forward? Okay. We have language service, so the editor understands when you, for example, type this dot, it will give you a list of methods and properties. We have there's an animation here that I didn't put in. IntelliSense, we have code generation for several things, and we have custom designers. The compiler, like I mentioned, is created on top of Roslyn. We have drawn this pyramid here, and the top of the compiler, which is colored yellow here, we created that with a tool called Antler, which is a compiler generator. And Antler helped us to automate the creation of what's called a parser. The parser is responsible for understanding keywords and then understanding order in which keywords need to appear in your language. The parser also allows you to produce what we call a parse tree, and we have created a mechanism that this parse tree gets converted to something that Roslyn understands, and then we can let the guys from Microsoft who created the C# compiler do the difficult things. Difficult things meaning looking up data types, binding the stuff, so that if we say something is a string, find the support for the string type in the .NET framework, and in the end also generate a assembly or a DLL or exe containing intermediate language, the intermediate language that also gets produced by C#. So what we did is we created basically a new top, but I would say more than 90% of the code in our compiler is created by Microsoft. And the good thing is that we had this, because we had so much code, we could fairly quickly get our compiler done. Okay, I mentioned the word dialects. So what we have done is to differentiate between different implementation of XSpace. We introduced the concept of dialect. And our most important or most basic dialect is what we call the core dialect. And core dialect is nothing more than C# with an XSpace syntax. It has only the data types that you have when you develop in C#, stuff like system datetime, system string, system object, etc. And it doesn't have support for Foxpro arrays or dates or any of the special XSpace types, no currency, etc. What we have added on top of the core dialect is other dialects, and we have added support for these XSpace specific things. And we have also added support for things like functions and procedures. C# doesn't know functions. C# doesn't know procedures. In .NET, everything is a method. So we have added support to compile procedures and functions into basically in the end it's all going to be methods, and then you can call them with the function syntax. And we have also introduced support for publics and privates, a concept which is alien to most C# developers. And of course, many of you have already learned over the time that it's not always smart to do it, because these are dynamically scoped, and there's a trick always that you get in problem with that. What we also added was support to access DBFs. And we have a mechanism called RDDs, which is an abbreviation of replaceable database drivers, because in the XSpace world, different incarnations of DBF have been used. So we support both the DBF CDX FPT that Foxpro has, but we also support DBF NTX, which for people who are coming from the Clipper community. So we have a mechanism that you can choose which driver you want. So what is the current state of XSharp? Well, my team, we are coming from Visual Objects Spoken, and most of our customers were coming from that direction, so that's not a surprise that we have that done it as first. Right now we have a lot finished for XSharp+, but not everything there. And the same is true for Visual Fox Pro. We have a lot running, but not everything yet. And Harbor we started with, but it's not complete at all. Okay. Now this is a Fox Pro event, so let's go look at Fox Pro. What have we done? What stage is the product with regard to Fox Pro? I can say that almost everything in the Fox Pro language is working. You can take your Fox Pro program and compile it. There may be some corners that we've missed. We've based our language support for Fox Pro on what we found in the documentation. But the documentation is not always complete. And there are some things that we every now and then find in customers' code that are no longer really documented. So that's why we need help of the community with examples if stuff doesn't work. There's a big difference, by the way, between certain X-based dialects. Fox Pro is what we call command-based. The set of built-in functions in Fox Pro is relatively small, but there's a lot of commands. It's we would, from the corner where I come from, we say it's very verbose. We had, for example, a go top statement or the go top command in some of the other languages is compiled into function calls. And what we have done is in the product, in our compiler, we built in something called a preprocessor. So what we do is we translate commands into function calls. That also means that if you have a variation of a command or a command that we don't support yet, with the help of the preprocessor, we can fairly quickly convert that into a function call and you write the function yourself. So we do not have to change the compiler to add support for a new command, but we can do that with a preprocessor. And you just, if you make sure that the function that implements a certain command is available at compile time, you can just by writing an instruction for the preprocessor, add the command to the language and call the function that implements the command. What we also have done is we created IDE support. So if you're coming from Fox Pro, for me that was a bit stranger environment. And it's like you guys work in Fox Pro. So you not just work with Fox Pro, but you also work in Fox Pro. Fox Pro is your tool, and everything that you use, including Tor, etc., is written in Fox Pro. For us, this is kind of new. We use Visual Studio for development, and so it's not a dedicated IDE. That's good and bad. It's good because many people on the world use it, not just a small community. So there are many, many extensions. The bad thing is it's not as customizable as the Fox Pro IDE. Yes, you can customize it, but the interface to that is a bit more complicated than the interface to customize the Fox Pro IDE. But tools like Thor definitely also exist for Visual Studio. And there's a complete marketplace online for Visual Studio extensions. So yeah, you can extend it, but it's a bit, especially because you guys are moving after many years of Fox Pro to a new IDE, it can be a bit overwhelming to work with Visual Studio because it's a completely different tool. So, but the good thing is, if you move from Fox Pro to .NET and to Visual Studio, you're going to open up a complete new world. Not just a new world in the sense of a development language, but also a new world of third-party tools. I wasn't aware of that, but I've looked at VFPX. There are many Fox Pro extensions, but there is no VFPX for .NET. There are hundreds of VFPXs for .NET. There are component vendors like DevExpress or Infogistix that alone have more controls or more components that you can ever find in VFPX. I personally find the biggest problem is to choose which component you use. There's not just one grid, but there are at least a dozen grids, and they all have a lot of facilities, and which one do you choose in your app? Of course, you can focus on the standard grid that comes with the .NET framework, but you can also choose from many other components. Okay, what you get also if you move forward to the .NET world, we just saw the session from Tamar about collections. Well, .NET has collections, and not just one collection class, .NET has dozens of collection classes. I find sometimes you have to think which collection fits the best. They have collections that are called dictionaries or generic collections or just collections of objects, and it depends on your application which one you use. In the session of Tamar, she mentions the difference between collections and arrays. Well, guess what? In our implementation of the arrays in .NET, we have used the collection to implement the array. Uh, Collections is basically, yeah, that's one of the most common components in the .NET framework, and everybody uses them. What you also get, well, I'm not going to read the slide because I know you guys can read, but I think one of the important things is that you can get full Unicode applications, and your applications can be any CPU, which means they run in 32 bits, 64 bits, but they also run on ARM. I was surprised last week to see a customer that was running parallel desktop on an ARM MacBook, and he was running Visual Studio on ARM, and our applications were running on ARM. I had no idea that it was possible, but he proved that it works. So we should give all credits, of course, to the team from Microsoft who made it, made the .NET framework and .NET in such a way that it does run on ARM. But yeah, by using these technologies, you can also move your applications forward to other platforms. I'm not going to go in details about all of these commands. I'm going to show you some examples of this in code, but not. There's too much basically to have to do in one session. Okay, like I said, .NET Framework is what where your application will work with, and XSharp basically supports all versions of the .NET Framework, and there are many third-party products. So we used that there is a distinction between what's called the .NET Framework and what we internally call .NET Next. Um, but I'm not going to go into detail now. If you want to learn more about that, come and visit me in the booth or ask me during coffee, because that alone is a subject worth a complete session. We support both. Okay. We also have in our product, one of my colleagues, he hates Visual Studio. And well, basically, he hates everything that comes from Microsoft. Let's put it more in general. And some of you will understand why. I see already hands going clapping. Um, but we all develop for Windows, right? That's from the same Microsoft. So Microsoft is it's a bit of Jekyll and Hyde. It's good and bad. We have good experiences with Microsoft and bad. Anyway, with our product, we also give you an IDE which is called XIDE, the XSharp IDE, and that's a replacement for Visual Studio. And it's basically a tool written in XSharp, of course, because we eat our own dog food. And that's an alternative. But of course, you could also use Visual Studio Code or something like that to code with. Okay, this is one, and then we'll go to the code. So what does it cost? Like I said at the start, this is a vendor session and not a vendor session. XSharp is for free, and our source code is also available for free on GitHub. So you don't have to pay anything. To download the compiled version of XSharp, the only thing you need to do is create a user account so you can download it from our website. And we're not going to abuse that user account. It's just so that we will not have any hackers or trying to spam us or trying to basically do things that you don't like. We also have a free online forum where where have basically peer-to-peer support, but for people who support the development, we have a subscription system. It's called FOX, Friends of XSharp. When we decided this name, we didn't really realize that it could be confusing for Fox people, but it's also, maybe it's also funny that way. And it is a $9.99 per year per developer, but we give you a 50% discount if you use this. It's not mandatory. You can download it for free. The difference is that people who subscribe get a bit more frequent updates of the binaries. But if you want to download the source code, there is no delay in the source code in GitHub. So what I checked in yesterday is already in GitHub. And if you download, you could compile it and be at the same level as the subscribers. But I expect that some of you will find it a bit complicated to create a compiler and stuff like that. So we package it for you in the setup. And there's a difference then that the Fox subscribers get more frequent updates. And we also have a subscriber forums on our website where you get support by the dev team. But I do see that my colleagues from the dev team also do support on the public forums. So it's not just peer-to-peer. But if it gets too busy, they'll focus on the subscribers only. But I try to tell them, go spend time coding and don't do the public support. But guess what? They're going to do this public support anyway. Okay. So where do you find it? It's on our website, www.xsharp.eu. And we are on Facebook and Twitter, or X. Let's have a quick look at the website. It's slow, but because of the opt-in. Okay. If you have a user account, you can log in. It will get, and now there's an error here. It gives you access to that because we have download areas based on who you are. So we have separate downloads for registered customers or for subscribers. And we have a forum section here. I'm not going to go through it, but this is basically where you find it. And if you want to go to our GitHub repo, those of you who recognize the cat icon, this is the link to our GitHub repository where you can find the source code. For example, the XSharp public is where we keep the source code for the compiler, the runtime, the Visual Studio integration, etc. We also have several private repositories for internal use, basically. Okay, and let's look at code. So this was enough PowerPoint for now. Okay, and I want to have an open session, basically. Why is there no screen? Something goes wrong here. Help. I think I have to. Okay, but you guys are not seeing this. Technical problem. Watch part. Ah, there we are again. Cool. Okay. What do you guys want to see? Do you want to see me writing some code in Visual Studio, or do you want to see how we, for example, can transport your FoxPro apps to .NET? Yeah, the last. That's what I thought. Okay. We have a tool which is not released yet, but it will be part of the next public build of XSharp, what we call the Visual Fox Pro Exporter, the VFP Exporter, which is written, of course, in XSharp because we believe in what we do. And the tool looks like this. Now, before I'm going to run it, I want to show you a small app that we got from one of our French customers. One of my colleagues is from France. He did the VFP Exporter, and he got a small sample app from a customer. In the workshop on Sunday, I will do a larger app, which I have not converted yet. So you will see all the problems that you would get if you do your own conversion as well. So let's run this app just to give you an idea what it does. It basically has two forms. One form where you can show that you can read a control, and we have a focus event, and we have a form with a custom component with some buttons to skip and to delete, etc. And we can close the form. As you can see, there's a customers form. There's a control library. Over here, there's a toolbar, which is a control. So again, this is really simple, but it gives you an idea of several features. For example, there are also events here. So there's a click event for the button. Each of the buttons has its own click event. French names. I have no idea what they mean. Well, it's probably the first or the last. Validation button, close button, etc. So what we want to do is take this FoxPro app and create something from it that can compile in .NET. So to do so, let's close this because I'm going to run our. Why does my FoxPro not close? Oh, probably not important. I'm going to run my tool, which allows me to select a Visual Studio, sorry, a Visual FoxPro project, and then convert that to a Visual Studio solution. So what I can do is I can go to my folder and point to the project, which in this case is in my demo, and I need to tell it where to put the output. There's an analyze button here, which is going to, it doesn't exist, so I'll do it like this then. Come on.
Robert, we can't see, the remote people can't see your screen content.
That's not good.
Not sharing your presentation.
You're not sharing my presentation.
Oh, no, you didn't put it up.
Now it is. Now it's visible again.
Good.
Yeah, probably when the screen got detached somehow. Anyway, this is the tool. Let me create the folder first because. Okay.
You said they didn't see the demo to export CSV to Vector.
I'm gonna run analyze first, and it's going to look into this Visual Foxtrot project and show me what it found. This is a small one, so it's a really short list, but it gives you an idea of what it has discovered inside the project. Again, you guys probably know that. For me, that was new. That Visual FoxPro projects are databases. Visual Project Forms are databases. So we use our replaceable database driver basically to open the forms and the project and everything behind, and then extract this information and convert it into a Visual Studio solution. Let's just export it then. And now it has created a solution inside the output folder. Okay, let's go there. So we see the output folder and it has created the My Demo solution. It was the name of the project. I'm clicking on it and I'm opening this in Visual Studio. What it has done, and now if you're not familiar with Visual Studio, and I should probably open this in another version so the font is bigger, and say, because I have a version of Visual Studio set up for presentations, which I forgot about. Come on. So if you're not familiar with Visual Studio, the terminology differs a bit from what you're used to in Visual FoxPro. What you call a Visual FoxPro project which is also can also refer to control libraries, is called in Visual Studio a solution. And a solution can contain many projects. And in this situation, we have converted my demo project itself to a project in Visual Studio, but we've also converted the code that we found in the class libraries into a separate project. Now, of course, if these class libraries were used by one of your other projects, you wouldn't have to convert them again. So, but then you could swap it out and put the class libraries in the other project as well. Inside Visual Studio, we're just going to see what happens by compiling the application. So compiling is build solution. Of course, there are shortcut keys. Let's open the output window. Okay, now we see some things and we see some warnings. Let's start with the error first. Compiler tells me that there's a problem in this line. I'm not sure if you guys see it. This problem was also in the Foxpro code, but Fox will happily run this code. And so there's a change there command here with an extra closing param. Shouldn't be there. Now we have a new warning. My demo app exe functions already defines a member called start with the same parameter types. Now the original Foxpro project contained a start function. But that was the choice of the developer who wrote that code. His entry point could also have been main or whatever other name that he's chosen. What we do is when we generate exes for .NET, the entry point of the app always has to be start. So we have created a start function. And since there was a start function in the original app, now we have a name conflict because there are two start functions. If you look in my demo, you see there's a module or a source file called Visual Foxpro start. And this is the one that we created. And there's also a start in the code here. So this procedure start was basically the original start code from the Foxpro app. Now, the quickest solution to this would be to rename one. Okay. Now we get further, but still, we do not get a compiling app yet. So what is wrong? Now here we see that there's a command which does not get recognized yet by this version of XSharp. It's clear. I'm not sure what they mean here, what they wanted to clear. You guys probably know better than I. Is it clear the screen? Clear the desktop. Well, this app is not going to run in the Foxpro IDE. It's going to run as a standalone exe. So in this case, we don't need it because there is no desktop when you start the app. So I can comment it out. But what I could also do is add a command. Like I said, we have commands that are pre-processed. The command clear and say do nothing basically. So ignore it. So to do that, we would have to look in which include files are there, and you see an include file here called VFP command. This is an include file that is basically our temporary commands for Foxpro that will be merged in the main commands, but this is part of the exporter project. And in here, I could add the command. What is the end if you point to? Oh, this is just to prevent defining things twice. I could add the command and basically map it to do nothing. And now you see, when I make a fake that it gets recognized as a command because from black it turns blue now, but the result is that this basically gets ignored. If you look into this header file, you see erase command, for example, gets mapped to the ferase function. A delete file gets mapped to ferase function. So many of the Foxpro commands have been defined this way. Here, for example, you will see that commands like text2 are processed this way. Yeah, the rules are quite complicated, so there are many in here. You see store, scatter, all of these are basically defined as preprocessor instructions and get compiled into function calls. Some of these functions start with a double underscore, which sort of means uh, don't trust them, don't touch them. We may change the implementation. Of course, you can still call them, but in the next version, we may add a parameter to these functions or stuff like that. But you can see, for example, getter from array name gets compiled into underscore underscore getter array. And use, for example, is defined here. The use command, there are different variations. A use with nothing gets compiled into db close area. A use in gets compiled into, this is the alias operator, basically close in a certain area. And the use with all kind of options get compiled into a db use area. And this square brackets means that if you specify indexes, it will be included, but this is optional. So if you do not put index on the use command, it will just open the table. And of course, the production index when it exists. So this is how we implement the language, and it gives you real flexibility. And as you could see, the clear, which was obviously missing, is added with a simple instruction. And we will add that, of course, before when we get feedback from you guys, this command is missing or this option of the command is missing, we will add that to the definition. Let's just try to build again. I think we're almost there. Yeah, okay, it compiles now. We still see some warnings, but okay, let's ignore those warnings for now. So let's have a look at what we created. We had two forms in this application. We had a form with this toolbar on it, and we had a form with some controls. Now the toolbar itself was in the library. So in here, we see a toolbar which contains of two files. This is the normal way that Visual Studio handles Windows Forms classes or Forms windows and also custom controls. The designer is basically source code that declares the controls, sets their properties, etc. So we have taken the control definitions out of the FoxPro code and converted them into XBase code, and that we compile in .NET. And there's a designer file that basically contains code that you normally don't change because it sets the properties. And custom stuff, like events, are converted into methods in here. Come on, where are we? For example, we had the command suivre, I think that's next, and it is the click event gets converted to a click event. Now, there was one challenge here, and that is FoxPro is handles events a bit different than Windows Forms does. So our decision has been to convert FoxPro Forms to Windows Forms. So because that's the most common UI library in Windows, and also its appearance looks most like what you see in FoxPro. But FoxPro events are handled at the control level. So the click event is linked to the button. In Windows Forms, events are usually handled at the form level. So our converter has converted the click event on the command suivre button to a command suivre click event on the form. However, in your FoxPro code, you can, inside this click event, you could say this something. And in that case, this is the control. However, if you move that code to the form, this would no longer be the control, but this would be the form. So what we do in our converter is we created something called the this object. This is generated by our converter, and it assigns basically the object of the control. This is the command suivre, which is I'm not sure if you can read the tooltip, but it says XSharp VFP UI command button. So we created the command button class, and so this is now a command button. And then if you call something on this command button, then then you basically get the same behavior as you got in FoxPro. It is a bit of a trick, and I'm not really sure what FoxPro does under the hood, because the click event is apparently an event on a subclass of the command button, but we don't see subclasses of the command button in the FoxPro code. So I think FoxPro somehow generates a procedure or a function and tricks it into thinking that it is a method of a class, and puts this local in the context of this function automatically. Does some tricks there. We made it fully object oriented the way it's supposed to be in .NET, and that's why we have to play with this object. So inside this method, we can still do this. Then we see the standard Windows Forms methods for the form class, because this code is now part of the form. For compatibility, we also added this form, because that's what you guys were using in the FoxPro event handler on the button. Now this form is technically identical to the this in the context that we are now. But so we didn't have to change a lot of code. So those changes that we make are documented. Okay, let's stop talking and let's see if it runs. I know that it doesn't run. So, because I know there's a problem with this sample. But this comes up. It's not 100% identical. Oh, I get the focus change already. Come on. But if I type something here, we see that at this version, the dimensions are not 100% identical. I think the form in FoxPro didn't have any dimensions, so it would default to the FoxPro form default dimensions, and this defaults now to the Windows forms. But we can see the copy text works, so the event behind the button works. The next will bring up the form, but this will crash. And why? We should see an error here. Okay. And it says a file not found. The FoxPro code had a relative path to the images for the toolbar, and it was relative to the class library where it was declared in. But we didn't add code to copy those files to the same relative path compared to where the output is stored that Visual Studio produces. So we need to copy those files over, or we should have used another mechanism to specify the location of the images. Now I have to think about the path. Okay, where is that then? So this is where it is. I think I'll probably not do it right. So I'm warning you, because this is my colleague's sample. I think this is the right path, but I always get confused with double dots in the name. So run it again. No. Now we get the same thing for the DBF. There was a relative path in there, and now it can't find it, so I need to copy the DBF over. Bin data. Do it again. This is the kind of things that you can expect. And this is a terrible example, because the locations of the files are relative to the project. You should never do that, of course. But hopefully it works now. I still see an issue with the transparency, but the form was converted and the events are working. So the idea is that we took the layout of the form, we converted it to Visual Studio. Now, of course, it would be nice if you can now also design those forms in Visual Studio and I hope it works. I didn't try this. No. Again, the path location is incorrect. So that's why the toolbar doesn't work. So I probably need to do something with the paths. But if the paths are set correctly, then this will open in Visual Studio. And normally in Visual Studio, you would never store those images as external files, but you would link them as a resource in your project, so they're embedded into your AFC. But this particular sample uses external files, which is supported, but it's not recommended. This, of course, doesn't have that dependencies, and this just basically works. How am I doing on time? Cool, yeah. So,
25 minutes.
yeah. So, what we have at the moment is a tool that brings things over. It's not perfect yet. There are still some things. What we do in this tool is we make changes to your code. Otherwise, it won't run. The tool itself is data driven. So if there is something that needs to be done that we are not supporting yet, this tool runs with a set of JSON files that describes the changes that we have to make. One change, for example, is that property names of control properties in FoxPro are not the same as the property names in Visual Studio. So we convert that. We also convert, for example, assigning a width and a height to something, which is, as if I remember correctly, is what you do in FoxPro. But in Visual Studio, they expect you to assign a dimension. So a size, basically, as one object and not as two separate values. So in the converter, we change those things so your forms will work. Is there any question about this? Yeah.
Just had a question on variable names where in C#, that number is the first letter versus the second, right?
Yeah.
And it's different than functional to get like using time.
Yeah. Okay. Good question. The question is case sensitivity, basically. Well, all the X-based languages are case insensitive. So our compiler is also case insensitive. So if you're sloppy in that way, there's absolutely no problem. We do support compiling in case sensitive mode, and it's sometimes good to run that check, because if you are exposing your class library to C#, it's probably a good idea to have your camel casing or whatever convention you choose done properly, so that the names that you expose follow that convention. But default behavior is to be case insensitive. This is also one of the changes we had to make to the Roslyn code. So in the Roslyn code, on several locations where it was using what they call dictionaries, which is a kind of collection to store references to data types like system string or system datetime, we made those collections case insensitive. So if you would do string with a lowercase s or datetime with all lowercase, it would still find it, would still resolve it into the right time, right object. So yes, that's what we do. One thing that I didn't mention, but what is important, is that many of the X-based languages are untyped. So you can write code without specifying types, and you can declare two locals, A and B, and you can add them. And at runtime, the FoxPro runtime or Clipper runtime will see if there's both strings, then it's an accepted plus operator. If it's both numeric, it's accepted. If it's a date and a number, it's accepted. But if you're trying to add a string to a number, it's not accepted. So that's what we call late bound code or dynamic code. At runtime, the runtime decides if the operation is allowed, yes or no. And of course, we support that. However, .NET doesn't support that. So we have added support in the language. We added basically something what C# calls dynamic, but then a bit different. So you can have operations like plus or minus, but also method calls on things that are not declared as a certain type. But for performance, it's better to add a type. Just like you can do a FoxPro, you can declare something as, let's say, as collection. The big difference is, even though in FoxPro you declare something as collection, you can still assign a string to it, for example. That's not possible in XSharp. If you declare something as a collection, the compiler will tell you, no, no, you cannot assign a string to a collection unless the designer of the collection class has added a method that says, well, if you send in a string, for example, in theory, you could think that it would convert it to a collection of characters. It doesn't do that, but you could. And that's how, for example, in the implementation of our XBase types, if you have, we have different types for numbers with and without decimals. So the integer type, integral types like int or int64, and we have types with a decimal. And we have a special type that takes care of converting that. So you can assign a number without a decimal to a number with decimals and the other way around. And in our language, we have created support for doing those implicit conversions. But the designer of the language and the designer of the runtime has to make those decisions. To give you an example, let's just close this solution. And let's start a complete new project in Visual Studio here. And let's take the FoxPro template. We have a few FoxPro templates, not many yet, but we are adding those as we go. Like I said, FoxPro language is not 100% implemented yet. And the way our project works is that we are customer driven. So if we have a lot of FoxPro customers, guess what gets priority? Or if we have a lot of Visual Objects customers. Now, Visual Objects, like I said, is almost ready. FoxPro not. But if you guys think this is a chance to move forward and you support us, then you will get FoxPro support, more FoxPro support. I can choose here for Visual FoxPro, and there are now two templates. One is a class library, and one is a console application, which is basically the terminal window from Windows. Let's start with that one, and then show the class library later. This is, of course, a fairly stupid project because this is a simple console, but you can see that it has a start function. This is mandatory in XSharp project. You have to have a start function. We do not have, files that have no entry point. You need an entry point. We do support parameters and help parameters, of course, but we can also pass in parameters as within the parentheses, just like you can do in C#. Let's just compile this and then see what happens. And then start adding a few things. My machine is slow because of all the things that are running in the back. But the idea is, well, you can read this. It says, hello, it is 2010-23. Now let's do this, what I said, untyped and typed code. So I can declare a local, a comma b. This should show hello Southwest Fox, but let's add a space here so it looks better. If we compile this, you see it just compiles. If you look in Visual Studio, if you want to see what the compiler has done, you can open the output window. You see it created the file, no warnings, nothing. It compiles and it runs. Hopefully. Yeah, it does. Now, if you would do something silly, it still compiles, but of course, it crashes because it basically doesn't understand this. It's not what it expects. And you can see in the debugger, and this debugger, by the way, you can drill into collection stuff. This is the Visual Studio debugger. It was a lot of work, but we only had to learn it how to do XSharp. But all the tools, etc., are Visual Studio. But it doesn't know how to do A plus B. So if I had declared my variables as string, not as character, as many FoxPro people do, we could declare, again, we could use a tell the preprocessor to convert character to string. So to replace the word character with string, that's really a no-brainer. But the default is string. We try to keep it as close to the .NET framework as possible. If we build now, we get the error message cannot implicitly convert type int to string. So implicitly means that in theory you could do an explicit conversion, but explicit conversion here will not work. What you could do is call a method. This makes look a bit weird. So you're calling a method, and whether it's a Foxbow, I could probably also do this. I call a method on a number. This is something in .NET. Everything, all the data types inherit from an object. So everything is an object. So this actually works. It's weird and it's not. Oh, actually, it doesn't work. Okay. Anyway, I expected this is probably something other than that. But if you do some typing, before we saw hello between curly braces, curly parentheses, string, and 42 is a number. If you look now, you will see that these are no longer untyped, so there's no type specification there, but these are now declared as string. Now before, these were declared as what we call usual, which is like an untyped type. By doing this, by typing your variables, you get rewarded with compile time warnings or errors, and the code will be faster too. Because this usual thing that we saw before is basically like a container that can contain different types of values, and inside this data type there are rules what can be added and what cannot be added. And if you do something that's not supported, then you get the exception. So this is what's recommended, but we do support untyped code. So you can also do, well, I'm not really, Foxbow is not my bread and butter, so I have to think about an example. But for example, local cust as, what is the object that you can add properties to? Custom? Empty. Well, let's not declare it. And let's say, cust is add property.
The function has no method. This is a function calling. You must call a function,
Okay.
and the object and the
Yeah, I see. I declared the function. The function is there. It's not there because I got it. This is received by Microsoft. We actually coded this. So, and I tell the property
property name and
last
device digital.
name. Now I have to make sure that I make no typos in the name. Is this correct, Rick?
Yep.
I'm not offending you like this. As you can see, on purpose, I changed the case of the properties to show you that it works. Let's get rid of this. Fingers crossed. Always like doing something on scratch. It's dangerous, but also fun. Oh, it works. So this is basically part of our Foxbow emulation. Create object as such doesn't exist in the .NET framework. There's a function, and you can see over here, it is create object. It has a class name, it has optional arguments, and it, well, the summary says it creates an object, and it is located in XSharp VFP DLL. That's our runtime assembly where we put all our Fox Pro stuff. And most likely add property is also, yeah, on the bottom line, location XSharp. If you see this documentation and you see a lot of things that are common to what you see in the Fox documentation, that's not a coincidence. So we have, for some of these functions, we have actually scraped comments out of the Fox Pro help documentation, basically. There's a Fox documentation project on GitHub, and we have used that to help document stuff. But if, of course, the documentation is not correct, for us, it was the template on which we built stuff. So that's, if you see something that's not working, it's because the documentation wasn't correct. Yeah, question. Hint.
Just look up the tickets of that project.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, but first we try to implement it before we're going to look at the tickets. Yeah, yeah. Other question?
Repeat the question, please.
Oh, the question was look up the tickets first so you can see what the problems are in the docs. Yeah, good suggestion. But our priority is first to get it done and then fix the problems. Yeah.
The things that are not in the help are a lot of that is in the tickets.
Yeah, okay. The things that are not in the help are often in the tickets. Yeah.
I have a brief little question. Are XSharp compiled applications multi-threaded? Repeat the question.
The question is, are XSharp applications multi-threaded? The answer is yes, even though you do nothing. .NET has a garbage collector, which runs in a separate thread. So by default, you always have two threads, the main thread and the background thread that does the garbage collection, that clears up unused memory, etc. You can use the threading in the .NET framework to create as many threads as you want. For us, that posed a challenge because you can open a customers table in the main thread and also in the background thread. Now, the way we've designed it is that each thread gets its own data session, basically. So if you open customers in the main thread, you start a second thread, you open customers 2, it'll be also have a cursor with the name customers. If that thread ends, our runtime will detect the end of the thread, and if you haven't closed them, it will close them for you. So yes, we support threading. Cursors is one thing that is a challenge. Another thing is you could have changed a global setting. Modern apps try to avoid state. X-based language is full of state. State like set deleted, your date format, your set exact format, you name it, you set decimals. Each thread gets its own copy of the state. It inherits the state as it is from the main thread. So if you create a new thread and you set deleted on in the main thread, the new thread will also have deleted on. But if you change it there, it will not affect the main thread. So yes, it's supported. Our runtime supports this. It is likely that you find something there because it was human work and we make mistakes too. But in general, there's no problems. And like I said, we make sure that the state is per thread and the data session for that thread is also thread specific. So yeah, absolutely supported. And the .NET is superb, the threading. All the web apps run multiple threads and it's absolutely possible to do that, yeah. Other question, yeah.
How forgiving is it in terms of if you do this more, right? You get more familiar with C# or something else. You do some lines of Fox and switch to C# and back to Fox.
Okay, the question is, can you mix, how forgiving is it? Or I would say the following sentences were, can you mix Fox with C#? And yes. Not in one project. The way .NET works is that you build a project into an assembly, but you can written in C# and the other is written in Fox Pro or XSharp with the Fox Pro syntax, and then you can call code from C# into the Fox DLL and back. On my session tomorrow, where I'm showing Blazor. Blazor is a solution to do web assemblies and also mobile. We will add a XSharp component written in the Fox Pro dialect, and we will call from the Blazor web page into XSharp and return values back. And the XSharp will do a simple object or a simple function, but we'll also use SQL string connect or SQL exec to connect to a SQL Server database or what you of course could also have done in C Sharp. But imagine you have a piece of code that does that, and you can call it from a Blazor application and have the output shown in the web page from the Blazor app. So you can mix at that level you can, but you cannot mix inside one assembly. Blazor does that, but then they have used a special trick where they embed C Sharp code in a web page, and then they basically split it up. And for one thing, they build the C Sharp assembly, and then the rest gets compiled to something that produces HTML. But that's a trick that we haven't done yet. So there's no support for XSharp in the Blazor page, but as an assembly, I've definitely, absolutely, yeah. Other questions? I can show you all the new features, but yeah, another question.
Have your a page for the status, for example, Kubernetes list,
Yeah,
and what's the base process?
these are implemented.
Oh,
As far as I know, yes. So we have empty, we have custom, we have collection, etc.
yeah, like cursor adapter.
That's not on the list, but we're working on a cursor adapter. So a cursor adapter is,
Yeah, that's the question.
yeah, the question is, what is a cursor adapter? Yeah, for me, it was a new concept because it didn't exist. But the way I see it is the cursor adapter is like an object around a cursor. And you can fetch data, for example, through ADO and create a cursor from that. And that's something that we do. We have, if you do a SQL exec, you also fetch it remote data. You stick it into a cursor, and then you can do a scan and scan, etc. That's basically the same what a cursor adapter does, but SQL exec is for ODBC, and the cursor adapter you guys use for ADO or probably also other data sources. To me, technically, that's the same. In .NET, there's a .NET data provider for ODBC, and there's a similar data provider for ODB, which is what's behind ADO, and there's a native data provider for SQL Server. Now we support all of those.
Yeah.
So what we are working on the cursor adapter class itself, but what you need to fetch data from an external source based on ADO.NET or ODB, ODBC, native SQL Server or native Oracle or native MySQL is already there. So, and yeah, how am I doing on time? Still?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. So I'm not going. I'll show you tomorrow how we do ODBC in the page, but we support with the same SQL exec syntax. We have added a function that says I'm not want to use ODBC. I want to use native SQL Server, and then of course you have to change your connection string, but the rest will work just the same, because we're using. One of our principles, we do not try to reinvent the wheel. So if there's something in the framework, we use it. And we may put a small layer on top of it so the syntax is familiar. That's what we'll do for the cursor adapter. So we will write the code. That's what we've done for the collection. We didn't write a new collection, but inside the collection, of course, there is a .NET type. There's no secrets there. You can just look at it. And if you think we implemented it the wrong way because we don't understand FoxPro, it's probably a few lines of code changed to implement it the way you guys expect it to be.
My final question, can we add objects to forms in runtime?
The final question is, I want to add objects to forms at runtime. Now that may be a challenge because the form class that we have does not inherit from the empty object. The form class itself is part of the .NET form hierarchy. So we have created the VFP form class. However, what we can do is we can add an add object method to our VFP and then have a collection in there that handles it.
So that means I have, for example, I place containers something on in form.
Yeah. So the question is, the example is I'm creating containers on demand on the form. Yeah, we need to expand the RVFP form class to allow that. So normal .NET classes do not have support for these dynamic properties or these dynamic children. You need to leave something. Well, the form class does have support for what they call a controls collection. So if you add a button, it gets added to the controls collection, just like you would expect if you add a button to a VFP form with add object, it's part of the controls collection. The collection may be named differently. So technically, in .NET, it works with Windows Forms. It works the same. And for other kind of things, of course, everything is an object class. So you can also write your own subclass of the form and put stuff in there, and then it's strongly typed and early bound. But if you want to do it dynamically, yeah, we need to see how to solve that. But it's not impossible. You just have to invent syntax to do that. Any other questions? Okay. The .NET is a huge environment, and I think with XSharp, we give you guys opportunity to move your apps forward. The question that I didn't get, I expected, was what about reports? My answer to that is there is no standard .NET reporting solution. There is for forms, but not for reporting. So if we would tell you we'll migrate your stuff to active reports or one of the other tools, you would be locked into that. So we don't have a solution for that yet. We are working on transporting Fox reports to a reporting tool that we have ourselves, which accepts XML reports, so we can convert it to an XML. But if you have specific reporting solutions you want to work with in .NET, we need to see if we can help you convert your stuff. Everything is data in Fox Pro, so the reports are data too. So it should be possible to convert your column layout and your bands, but it may be difficult to have 100% identical layout. That's a challenge. Okay. Are there any other online questions?
Nope.
No? Okay, thanks a lot for your attention. I think I'm running out of time. There'll be a Q&A after this, so we can continue the questions over there. Thanks a lot.